The autumn wind of 1873 carried more than just the scent of dying leaves across the Colorado Territory. It carried destiny, though Jack Morrison had no way of knowing that as he urged his weary horse through the deepening shadows of Crow's Canyon. What started as a simple cattle drive back to his ranch would become the most important night of his life, and quite possibly his last. Jack was bone-tired after 3 days of chasing down strays, his weathered face etched with exhaustion beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 32, he'd seen enough of frontier life to know when trouble was brewing, and the increasing tension between settlers and the local Lakota tribe had everyone on edge. The recent incidents at Fort Collins had left nerves frayed and trust shattered on both sides. As twilight painted the canyon walls in shades of purple and gold, Jack's horse suddenly shied, ears pricked forward in alarm. That's when he heard it, a sound that made his blood run. A woman's cry of pain, echoing off the canyon walls like a wounded animal's call. But this wasn't just a cry. This was the unmistakable sound of a woman in labor, alone and in distress. Against every instinct screaming at him to ride away, Jack dismounted and followed. What he discovered behind a cluster of boulders would challenge everything he thought he knew about courage, compassion, and the invisible lines that divided their fractured world. A young Native American woman, barely more than a girl, lay propped against them. Her traditional dress was torn, her face pale with exhaustion. She couldn't have been more than 18, with long black hair matted with sweat, and eyes that held a mixture of pain and terror. When she saw Jack approaching, she tried to pull away, but another contraction doubled her. Now, Jack Morrison was many things, a decent, a fair judge of cattle, and a man who kept his word, but he knew absolutely nothing about delivering babies. The nearest doctor was 3 days' ride to Clearwater Springs, and this woman didn't have 3 hours, let alone 3 days. "Easy there," Jack said softly, removing his hat and approaching slowly, his hands visible. "I ain't gonna hurt you. Looks like you could use some help." The woman's eyes darted between Jack and the trail behind him, as if expecting others to emerge from the shadows. When she spoke, her English was halting but clear. You go. Not for you here." But Jack had already made his decision. His mother had delivered 7 children on their Kansas homestead, and he'd been present for the birth of his youngest sister. He knew the basic, even if the thought of being solely responsible terrified. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't think either of us has much choice in the matter right now." What Jack didn't know was that this young woman, whose name was Ayanna, meaning eternal blossom, was not just any member of the Lakota tribe. She was the daughter of Chief Running Bear, one of the most powerful and respected leaders in the territory. Her disappearance 3 days earlier had sent search parties in every direction, and her father's warriors were even now closing in on the canyon. As Jack knelt beside Ayanna, trying to remember everything his mother had taught him about childbirth, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The canyon seemed too quiet, as if even the wildlife's breath. But Ayanna's next contraction drove all other thoughts from his mind. "Okay, ma'am, looks like this little one's in a hurry," Jack's trying to inject confidence into his voice. "I'm going to need you to trust me here." Over the next 2 hours, Jack Morrison discovered reserves of strength and compassion he never knew he possessed. He built a small fire for light and warmth, used his own shirt to fashion makeshift bedding, and talked Ayanna through each contraction with the gentle patience of a man who understood that life was precious, regardless of the circumstances of its arrival. Ayanna, despite her pain and fear, began to see something in this white cowboy that challenged everything she'd been taught about his people. His hands were gentle, his voice kind, and his eyes held no judgment or hostility. When she told him her name meant eternal blossom, he smiled and said it was the prettiest name he'd ever heard. "Tell me about your family," Jack said during a brief respite between contractions, hoping to keep her mind occupied. "They must be sick about you." Ayanna's expression darkened. "My father, he is great, very powerful, very angry when he finds me." Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Well, let's just focus on getting you and this baby through this safely. Everything else can wait till morning." But morning seemed an eternity away, and both of them knew discovery could come at any moment. Jack had heard the stories of what happened to settlers found alone with native women, just as Ayanna knew the fate that often befell her people who trusted too easily. As midnight approached, Ayana's labor intensified dramatically. Jack found himself praying to a God he wasn't sure was listening, begging for the strength and wisdom to through. The young woman's grip on his hand was so he thought she might break his fingers. He never pulled away. "I can see you're doing great. Just a little bit more." And then, in a moment that seared his memory, new life entered the world. A perfect baby girl, her cries echoing off the stone walls like a song of triumph. Jack cleaned the infant with water from his canteen and wrapped her in his spare shirt, his hands trembling as he placed the baby in Ayana's arms. The sight of mother and child in the flickering firelight was so beautiful it brought tears to the hardened cowboy's eyes. For a moment, all the hatred and suspicion between their peoples seemed to fade away, replaced by the universal miracle of birth. "She's perfect, just perfect." Ayana looked up at him with eyes shining with gratitude and something else, respect. You save us both. Why? Why you help?" Jack considered the question seriously. "Because it was the right thing to do, ma'am. Sometimes that's all the reason a man needs." They spent the rest of the night by the fire, taking turns holding the baby, while Ayana recovered her strength. Jack shared his jerky and hardtack, while Ayana taught him a traditional Lakota lullaby. For those few hours, they existed in a bubble of peace, two souls connected by an extraordinary experience. But as dawn approached, reality began to. Jack knew and Ayana was clearly torn between gratitude, fear. "I should go. Your people will be looking for you, and it's better if they don't find us together." Ayana nodded, understanding the wisdom. Her next statement she whispered, her eyes fixed. Jack followed her gaze and felt his silhouetted against the dawn sky stood a line of mounted warriors, their feathered headdress unmistakable in the dim. More appeared on the opposite rim, then more, until the entire canyon was surrounded by what looked like the entire Lakota war party. Jack's hand instinctively moved toward his gun, then stopped. Even if he were the fastest draw in the territory, he was outnumbered at least 50-1. This was not a resolved. How many? Ayana was counting, her lips. When she finished, 200, maybe more. His all the warriors of 5 tribes. Jack felt a strange calm settle over him. If this was how his story ended, at least it would be for something worthwhile. He'd helped bring new life into the world, and that had to count for something. "Whatever happens," he told Ayana, "I want you to know that helping you and your daughter was an honor. Don't you blame yourself for whatever comes next." But what came next was unlike anything Jack could have imagined. Instead of war cries and charging horses, there was only silence. The warriors simply sat on their mounts, watching, waiting. Then, slowly, deliberately, they began to descend into the canyon. Jack stood protectively in front of Ayana and her newborn, his hand resting on his gun but not drawing it. If these were to be his final moments, he would face them with dignity. The first warrior to reach the canyon floor was an imposing figure in his 50s, chest adorned with the elaborate beadwork and feathers that marked him as a chief, his weathered face unreadable as he approached, but his eyes never left Jack's. "You are the one called Morrison," in accented but clear English, "the one who has helped my daughter." So this was Chief Running Bear. Jack had heard stories about the man's prowess in battle and his fierce protection of his people. Standing before him now, Jack understood why the cavalry spoke of him with grudging respect. "Yes, sir, I am," Jack replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "Your daughter needed help, so I helped her." The chief studied Jack for a long moment, then looked at Ayana and the baby. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Jack's bones. "3 days ago my daughter disappeared while gathering herbs. We searched everywhere, feared the worst. Now I find her safe with a healthy granddaughter because of you." The chief dismounted and approached slowly. Jack forced himself to remain still as the older man came close enough to count his eyelash. "You could have ridden away," Bear said quietly. "Most of your people would have. Why did you stay?" Jack met the chief's eyes steadily. "Because she needed help, and I was the only one there to give it." What happened next would become legend throughout the territory. Chief Running Bear placed his hand on Jack's shoulder and spoke to his assembled warriors in rapid Lakota. Then he turned back to Jack. "My people have a saying, a man's worth is measured not by what he takes, but by what he gives when no one is watching. You have given my family the greatest gift, life itself. This creates a debt that can never be repaid. The chief then did something that stunned everyone present, including his own warriors. He removed one of his most prized possessions, a necklace made from eagle feathers and sacred stones that passed down through 5 generations, and placed it around Jack's neck. From this day forward, you are no longer just Jack Morrison. You are brother to the Lakota people. You are family. But the ceremony wasn't over. One by one, every warrior in the canyon approached Jack. Some touched his shoulder, others placed a hand over their hearts and bowed their heads. Each gesture was a sign of respect, gratitude, and acceptance that transcended the bitter division. Ayanna watched with tears streaming down her face as her people honored the man who had risked everything to help her. When the last warrior had paid his respects, she stood on unsteady legs and approached Jack. I name my daughter Winona Morrison, Winona for firstborn daughter or tongue, Morrison to honor the man who brought her safely. Jack felt his need. To have a child named in his honor was beyond anything he'd ever dreamed. Chief Running Bear spoke again, his voice carrying across the canyon so that every person present could hear. Let it be known throughout all the settlement. Jack Morrison is under our protection. Anyone who threatens him, threatens his ranch, his cattle, all are as long as the sun rises and sets. What Jack didn't fully understand at the time was the magnitude of what had just occurred. In a territory where mistrust and violence between whites and Native Americans was the norm, he had just been granted something unprecedented. Absolute protection from the most powerful coalition of tribes in the Colorado Territory. The practical implications were staggering. Jack's cattle would never be stolen, his property never raided. Any disputes involving him would be mediated by the tribal. He had become, in effect, a bridge between two worlds that had been locked in conflict for decades. As the warriors began to mount their horses, the journey back to their villages, Chief Running Bear pulled Jack aside one final time. You showed my daughter kindness when you could have shown indifference. You chose courage when you could have chosen safety. These are the qualities of a true warrior, regardless of the color of his skin. The chief paused, studying Jack's face intently. There will come a time when our people challenges. When that time comes, we will remember this night and the man who proved that honor exists in all races. As the sun climbed higher into the mornings, the canyon gradually emptied until only Jack, Ayanna, and baby Winona remained. The entire extraordinary night dream, except for the weight of eagle feather on Jack's and the profound change. What happens now? Jack asked as he helped Ayanna prepare home. She smiled, and for the first time since he'd found her, it was a smile without fear or worry. Now, you go home to your ranch, and we go home to our village, but we are not the same people. Jack Morrison returned to his ranch that morning as a different man than the one who had 3 days. Word of what had happened spread quickly through both the white settlements and the Native American village, growing in the telling until it became the stuff of legend. Some called it the miracle of Crow's Canyon. Others said it was simply proof that decency could triumph over prejudice when given the chance. Jack himself never spoke much, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. But the changes were undeniable. Over the following months and years, his ranch became an unofficial meeting ground between the two communities. Disputes were settled there peacefully, trade relationships were established, and gradually the hostility that had characterized the region began to ease. Ayanna named her daughter's official birthday the night she was born in the canyon, and every year on that date, she and Winona would visit Jack's ranch. The little girl grew up bilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable in her mother's village and at Jack's dinner table. When Winona was old enough to understand, Ayanna told her the full story of her birth and the cowboy who had risked everything to help them. The child would look at Jack with wondering eyes and ask him to tell her of the night she was born. Well, little one, Jack, settling back in his chair with the eagle feather necklace glinting in the firelight, it was the most important night of my life, because that's when I learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the choices we make when no one's watching. As years passed, the story of Jack Morrison and the night in Crow's Canyon became a cornerstone of local folklore. It was told around campfires and dinner tables, passed down through generations, as proof that understanding and respect could bridge even the deepest divide. The eagle feather necklace never left Jack's neck, and the protection of Chief Running Bear's coalition never wavered. When Jack eventually married and had children of his own, they grew up knowing Winona as their sister in all but blood, and Ayanna as an aunt who taught them that the world was far bigger and more beautiful than any one perspective could contain. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew through Crow's Canyon just right, travelers claimed they could still hear the echo of a baby's first cry, carried on the air like a promise that hope and compassion would always find a way to triumph over fear. The night a cowboy helped a Native American woman deliver her baby became more than just. It became a testament to the truth that in our darkest moments, when we choose to help rather than walk away, we don't just change other lives, we transform our own, and sometimes, if we're very lucky, we change the world around us too. Jack Morrison lived to be 93 years old, surrounded by a family that spanned 2 cultures and unified by love that transcended all boundaries. When he passed peacefully in his sleep, representatives from 7 tribal nations joined the settlers at his funeral, and Chief Running Bear's grandson spoke these words over his grave. Here lies a man who proved that courage isn't about how fast you can draw your gun or how many enemies you can defeat. Real courage is about standing up when someone needs help, even when it costs you everything. Jack Morrison chose love over, and in doing so, he showed us all how to be better, he thought. The eagle feather necklace was buried with him, but the legacy of that extraordinary night lived on. Crow's Canyon was eventually renamed Morrison Canyon. In his honor, monument Winona had been born. The inscription, written in both English and Lakota, reads simply, "Here, on the night of October 15, 1873, a cowboy named Jack Morrison proved that kindness knows no boundaries, and that sometimes the most important thing a man can do is simply help when help is needed." And every year, on Winona's birthday, her children and grandchildren gather at that monument to tell the story again, ensuring that the lesson of Crow's Canyon will never be forgotten. It remains a reminder that, in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, it only takes one person choosing compassion over comfort to change everything. The story of the cowboy who helped a Native woman deliver her baby and woke the next morning to find himself honored by 250 warriors standing in respectful silence became more than legend. It became proof that when we act from our hearts rather than our fears, we can bridge any divide and build connections that last for generations. In the end, Jack Morrison discovered something that night in Crow's Canyon that would sustain him for the rest of his life. True wealth isn't measured in cattle or land or gold, but in the relationships we build and the lives we touch. We choose to be our best selves, especially when no one is watching and everything is